Foreman passed, man. We were gonna do something a week ago, but life and everything, and we like to decompress and collect our thoughts. But BT, man, I'm gonna let you go first. George Foreman, passes away at 76 years old, and I shared some of my thoughts on this on the Porter Way, but you let it rip, man. What do you got for us?
I got quite a lot, man. I'm a big George Foreman fan. I think it's kind of hard to, in a couple of minutes put into words like what his impact on boxing was. But like, if we could start with, because I was watching the Tommy Morrison fight the other day, and that fight was for the WBO title. And back in those days, it's not like today. It was the three belt era,
Right.
and that and they and the a lot of the commentators, they were scoffing at the idea that this was a legitimate heavyweight title fight. But look, now the WBO title is a legitimate title, and I think George Foreman helped legitimize one of boxing's four big sanctioning bodies. So you have that aspect. You have the aspect of, George Foreman meant something beyond just boxing. I mean, he was a pop culture icon. He was in King of the Hill. He had the George Foreman grill. He had all those things going on. And then, in the ring, I mean, like quite possibly the hardest punch heavyweight that ever lived. And I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves for having one of the best jabs in heavyweight history.
Yep.
He had a telephone pole jab. I mean, people know he had a great jab, but I never hear it, put in the discussion with the great jabs in history, and I feel like it should. Um, I always wanted to see George one of the fights I was hoping George would have had in the '90s was like, even though I was like 2 years old when he was fighting in the '90s, would have been like Mike Tyson or Riddick Bowe. I would have liked those fights in the '90s for him. It's unfortunate those never happened. And then what was I going to say? Oh, the main thing I wanted to touch on though, because I know I'm all over the place, is Sean, like one of the early parts of my boxing media career. I used to cut my teeth going to the Heavyweight Factory interviewing Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe.
Yep.
And I remember talking to Holyfield and just hearing how he would describe an older George Foreman's punching power was crazy, because he used to always say that when he fought Tyson, it was like Mike Tyson when he would hit him, he was just throwing rocks. Like, they're hard, but they're smaller. When Foreman hit him, you could see Foreman's punches, but when it hit you, they were like boulders.
Mm-hmm.
So just the respect that he had amongst everybody, like,
Overall, did because I think I remember watching those interviews of yours from like 10 years ago.
yeah,
I
almost,
think
yeah.
like he described the different way their punching power was, but did he ultimately ever give the edge to either guy? It's just
No,
the
no, he
purest of
said
punching.
so. It was two separate interviews. The one you're referring to is the one that did like 4 million views or whatever it was.
Yeah.
In that one, I remember he said that George Foreman was the hardest punch he ever fought. Evander Holyfield, who's fought everyone, so that's huge compliment there.
That's Lennox
Um,
Lewis. That's Mike
Lennox Lewis,
Tyson.
Mike Tyson,
Yeah.
Riddick Bowe. I mean, the
Yeah.
list goes on and on. But in a separate interview, another one besides that one, he was talking about how they felt like boulders when they would hit him. So, what's really impressive to me about George Foreman, Sean, is that boxing, this boxing industry, whether you're in the media, you're a fighter, you're a manager, whatever part of boxing you're in, it's very toxic. Everybody always has something negative to say about another person. And with George Foreman, it's like you don't really hear any negativity about him. So that right there speaks volumes about him.
Yeah, I had an interview with well, first of all, man, I think let's not understate what Brendan was able to uncover in an interview 10 years ago. Like Tyson or Foreman, who's the better puncher, is a debate will people still have and will continue to still have. And Evander Holyfield told you
Mm-hmm.
George Foreman is the harder puncher. Is the hardest puncher he ever faced. That obviously includes two fights with Tyson. So first of all, like shout out to you, Brennan, because you
Yeah.
you you actually had that debate from the man that could answer it better than any other human being on the planet, and he said it's Foreman. So let's first of all, if nothing else, this video was worth you watching if you're listening right now because Brennan actually figured out for you who the hardest puncher in heavyweight history probably is. It's George Foreman. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, there was. I could say a lot about George too. I think his craft, even when he was young, because his craft got credit when he came back and he was old in '87 through winning the title in '94. But I remember talking to Tim Bradley about George shortly after his death, and Tim said the way he was able to control the other fighter's body, even in the first half of his career, was really superb. Little things like putting his hands on the other fighter's shoulder and keeping him
Mm.
off balance, hitting him in the hip. And yeah, like you said, had an underrated jab even back then. And I think if you only watch the Muhammad Ali fight from the 70s, the Rumble in the Jungle, and I know he looked crude in knocking out Ron Lyle as well, but there's just an underrated craft to him there. And then, of course, when he joins Archie Moore for his comeback and he implements the cross arm defense,
Yeah,
and the jab becomes that much more proficient and educated. And then his punch delivery system was always unique, but it became more accurate, and obviously a little less quick. Even though George was never known as the quickest hands guy, he definitely had some speed in his 70s. He was one of those guys that would throw clubbing shots and then a snapper or two or
yeah.
three. The pace on his punches would change up. And don't think he was slow, when he was young. And then he was slow, especially in the 90s when heavyweights were much faster. He was slow then, but he made up for it with timing and one of the most unique punch delivery systems we've ever seen. Case in point, the walking left uppercut knockout of Jerry Cooney.
Jerry
Like,
Cooney, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like his mechanics were crazy and just incredibly accurate. He's accurate when he's much slower than the other guy and has to plod forward a lot and is still finding him with shots. That's part of why he knocked out Michael Moore. He threw that right hand right down the pipe, but you didn't know if it was coming right down the pipe because George usually hurt guys with uppercuts or looping punches
Hmm.
or, yeah.
And to your point about his craft, Sean, he had that bump. Like, when
Yeah,
he'd
yeah.
bump you, and then the big clubbing overhand right or the uppercut would come after that. You knew like because Holyfield said in the interview when he bumps you, you know it's coming. You got to be prepared for it.
Right, right. And that's what I meant earlier, like what Tim was getting at with his ability to put his hands on the other fighter's shoulder or do little things to get them off balance and then get them with the power. Um, I want to, yeah, because, so the five career defining fights of his career, I think, if you had to say what are the five most notable fights of his career, it's got to be Ron Lyle,
Hmm.
Michael Moore,
Joe
Evander
Frazier,
Holyfield in '91, Muhammad Ali, and there's one other I can't grasp right now, but
Joe Frazier.
Joe Frazier. Thank you,
Yeah,
duh.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I said this on Sean's, but it bears repeating. What George Foreman did to Joe Frazier in their first fight is, I think, alongside only other fight that can really compete with it. And some people might say Tyson versus Spinks, but I think Spinks being a light heavyweight who was had a lengthy layoff and was everybody knew what was going to happen to Spinks, but I think that what Foreman did to Frazier in that first fight, alongside Joe Louis in the rematch with Max Schmeling, is the most destructive performance in heavyweight championship boxing history.
Mm.
He dropped, I think, five times, if not four, in 2 rounds. And that's Joe Frazier that you did that to. And yeah, just an incredible. And he actually he really set Frazier up for the uppercut because he was shooting over the top with a myriad of punches. Like his punch, he had the jab, and then he's coming over the top with kind of looping shots, and then boom, the uppercuts come from underneath, and
There it
Frazier,
is.
there it is, and that's it, and that's all she wrote. So he had the most destructive performance in heavyweight boxing history. He's the oldest heavyweight champion of all time with
Mm.
one of the greatest comebacks in sports history,
Gold medalist.
gold medalist, and I got it. This bears repeating too. With him passing, the sun has set on the big three: Ali, Frazier, and Foreman. Three back-to-back-to-back gold medalists who won the heavyweight championship of the world consecutively. They win gold in 60, 64, 68. Ali is the champion as Cassius Clay. Eventually, that vacated heavyweight title is claimed by Frazier. Foreman knocks out Frazier to get that belt, and then Ali knocks out Foreman to get the belt. For a decade, they ruled the heavyweight crown, and for the decade before they ruled the heavyweight crown, they dominated Olympic boxing by winning gold medals. So, and then just for a minute too, to get it deeper than boxing, we know he sold the Foreman grill and everything. But in losing George Foreman, we lose one of our connections to the old world.
Mm.
Because we're kind of undergoing a new world order, you could call it,
Yes, well, yeah, you know
do
about
do
that.
do do do, whatever. But in the old world traditionalism, things like that. Back when the face of sports marketing and endorsements could be a born again Christian who was trying to sell wholesomeness and innocence. In today's sport, in today's world, we get Jake Paul, who is selling the opposite of that.
He's not that. Yeah.
Spectacle, violence, controversy, and insulting others to market, right? And it's not about hating on Jake Paul. It's about contrasting how much society's tastes have shifted since Big George was on our television screens as one of the most recognizable faces in America and in the world. So that's what I mean by when we lose Foreman, we're losing yet another connection to the 20th century and some of the morals that stood in that time. So yeah.
And when he won the gold medal in the Olympics, he had the infamous picture with the American flags, and you know people were calling him all kinds of things at the time, and
Well,
he.
it's funny. He was known as this brute in the 70s heading into the Ali fight, right?
Mhm.
I think a closer look examines that may not have just. I haven't seen the film. I'm sure the film would help me expand on that. I know George from watching his career on DVDs and on YouTube and from documentaries about boxing. So, but he dressed like a hippie in Zaire, and at a time in the late 1960s and 68 when he wins his gold medal where it's very in vogue, it's very counterculture, and a lot of young people are rebelling against the United States around the time of the Vietnam War. He's this patriotic Texan who said he wishes he had two flags.
Mm.
And so maybe he was a little misunderstood because he was dressed like a hippie in Zaire. He's supposed to be this crude, super macho man, but he looks like a little bit of a flower power child in Zaire. But we know he's not really a hippie because he's from Texas and he's patriotic, and hippies are not Texas patriotic. So he was an interesting cat. Maybe a little, there's a little bit more depth to him even before becoming a born again preacher.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers,
Yes.
lot of layers to uncover, and he named all of his kids George as well. All of his kids are named George.
Yeah, yeah. So that when one of us gets in trouble, we all get in trouble.
That's
When
right.
one of us does good, we all get. I follow the logic of Big George. Bob Arum told me that at first, because this people forget now, the perception of George when he first had this image makeover, a lot of people thought it was phony,
He
and
did.
just like these preachers, Benny Hinn, Joel Osteen, and these others that use God and Christianity to make a lot of fucking money.
Yeah,
And
financial
I
gain.
feel bad using a lot of money. What I just putting that all in the same sentence as God. Forgive me, Lord, but that was making a point, and that's what people thought of George Foreman, that he was running game,
A
right?
con man.
Yeah, and Bob Arum told me, here's the quote from last week. I thought he was the biggest con man I'd ever met. And then he said, year went by, and I had come to realize behind closed doors time and again, this is who George Foreman was and had become. And Bob, who is a well known practicing Jew, said that is very possible with the power of religion, which I
Mm.
thought was very cool of Bob Arum, who's not, doesn't subscribe to the religion George became born
No,
again with, but acknowledged that it's very possible to change your whole life around through that. So that
correct.
was cool.
Yeah, so R.I.P. to George.
Did you do you, where did you rank him so he went 3-2 in his five career defining fights is the point I was wrapping up from 10
Uh-huh.
minutes ago. But yeah, where do you rank him
All time?
yeah, off top because I know we didn't say we were going to do that.
Yeah, I didn't even think about let me see. He's in the top five for sure. Just figuring out
Top
I'm
five.
trying. Yeah, he's in the top five. I would say so.
I think that's fair given that he won the heavyweight championship in the two golden eras of the heavyweight division, 1970s, 1990s. Um, Knocked out Michael Moore, knocked out Joe Frazier, Cooney. Um, should have wins over Tommy Morrison and Shannon Briggs, but should have a loss to Axel Schultz as well.
Yeah, and some people thought he lost to Alex Stewart. I thought he lost to Alex Stewart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Garden, right? What was that? At Madison Square Garden, he fought
That
out.
was at Thomas and Mack.
Okay, my mistake. I'm thinking of the Axel Schultz fight had to be at the Garden.
Yeah, I would say George because of George is winning the gold medal and then waited to Frazier and then become the oldest heavyweight champion of all time. There's a case you can make for him being the best heavyweight of all time.
Ah,
You don't think so?
nah.
Even skill wise, like he's the hardest punching heavyweight in history, and he's got one of the best jabs heavyweight history. So I'm not saying I'd put him number one, but I'm saying you could build a. It's not hard to build a case.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
I'd probably put him to answer your question. I'd probably rank him third of all time.
Behind Muhammad Ali and Joe Louis.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
I'm probably putting Lennox a little ahead of George, but now
okay,
that I really take it in, it's like I think I do that in part because Lennox is just who we think of and see as more technically proficient for sure. But being a great fighter isn't always just about that. It's also about the moments you produce
correct.
and even to a degree how you make people feel, the way you
Yeah,
touch them and their lives and their career. And George Foreman did more of that than Lennox Lewis. I just don't know if head to head I'd pick George Foreman to beat Lennox Lewis. I don't know about that. Maybe.
hmm.
You're,
Which George? I guess it depends on which George Foreman and which like prime for prime,
yeah.
like the George that fought Frazier
Yeah.
versus what Lennox in like the mid
George
'90s.
might just get hit too much against the
Yeah,
guy with the acumen and power of Lewis. I don't know.
the mental discipline. But again, like he might get hit by all those bricks from Lennox Lewis, but shit, let Lennox get touched by George.
I mean, Oliver McCall and
All
Hassan
of,
Rahman did it.
exactly, and then
And
I.
in old Holyfield, in their
Mm-hmm.
rematch, gave Lewis all he could handle in their rematch. So yeah,
Vitaly Klitschko is an amazing heavyweight, but even him on short notice was touching up Lennox Lewis. So
yeah, a
I
little
don't
bit
know,
out of
man.
shape, Lennox. And
That
Lennox,
would yeah, it was towards the
but
end. It
Lennox
was
didn't
to,
want that rematch. All right, that's for another day. But all right, man. Rest in peace, Big George. I hope
R.I.P. to George.
we did him some justice with that.